All right, guys. So this is Christina Abalos. I'm actually going to try my hand at doing my analysis through video. I haven't tried it before, but I'm actually pretty excited to try this different medium instead of writing a paper like I traditionally do. So the short story collection that I chose, "The Thing Around Your Neck," by Miss Adichie. She is wonderful. I've read her other work, so one of the reasons I chose her is one, I did want to get more exposure to her work. I've seen her TED Talk, taken a look at some of her other novels, but I do like kind of like the vignette quality of short stories, and was hoping to see her take on it. And it was also one of the 2019 best collections for short story, so I was super excited to pick it up. Some background about her is that she is she was born in Nigeria. She's an immigrant to the United States, and writes very much from that perspective, and also integrates the language differences and cultural differences within her writing. Some of it is based in her birth country of Nigeria, and then other pieces of work really kind of talk about how assimilation or failure to assimilate within the United States affects her characters. So this portion, I looked at all of it, which is wonderful, and I've already been suggesting it to other people. But one of the things that I really liked is that her collection has so many different things. So the couple that I'm going to be talking about, one is The Namesake, which is the thing around your neck, which I enjoyed, and then The American Embassy. These were the two that really stuck out to me in the collection. I did enjoy Cell One, which was based in Nigeria, but these really talk about going around and how different characters, which this is not in a series, as some of the other work we've read, but how different characters talk about trying to get a visa to go to the United States. And then here, The Thing Around Your Neck really talks about a character's kind of her experience coming to the United States, and how that was kind of portrayed as something beautiful and wonderful, whereas when she got to the United States, it wasn't quite as rose-colored. And so that's what I enjoyed. Cell One was good as well, which I'll be talking about that, but not quite where I was hoping to look for until I got to these two, and all of these are also very wonderful. I didn't have any stories that I did not enjoy. But she's a wonderful speaker and writer, so I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. Briefly to Cell One, I apologize for my camera, just because it gives you that background, since she is a Nigerian American writer. So Cell One I really enjoyed. So Cell One is in the perspective of a sister whose brother is very much like I apologize. Very much the older brother, who is really cool. Both of her parents are professors, and it kind of talks about the violence in the university system, and how he essentially changes when he ends up going to prison and wasn't really part of a cult. And the idea of a cult here is what in the United States we would call a gang. Whereas like all of these younger boys are trying to prove something. They're two very distinct cults, and so we'll be using that word here. And then towards the end, when he does actually go to prison, then there's an older man who hadn't done anything wrong, and it kind of changes his perspective. What I really liked about this is, and one of the things that I'm specifically looking for is like the language integration. So for example, because I speak Korean and English, and oftentimes that is my perspective when writing stories, I did like how she had original, and I believe for these stories it's Igbo, whereas the words here in italics, and then also the direct translations right after. And that was something I was looking for when writing multiracial pieces. And there are also some places where, she doesn't do that. So, for instance, the Okada drivers. And so, as a reader, without any background knowledge, I assumed very similar to other cultures, like Filipino culture, where it's a very specific mode of transportation, for instance, like a jeepney or things like that. But it's still pretty easy to understand. You'll also notice anytime I saw the italics, this is what I've noticed. So I enjoy this. There's also a lot of cultural things that are very relatable. For instance, when she noticed that her brother had a pimple-like insect bite on his forehead, which is something I think a lot of us have noticed. But storytelling, the pacing was very good. What I appreciated in this story, instead of plot points, was mostly about the transformation of the brother, but also the sister who's telling the story in terms of her sympathy for her brother, etc., and how her brother changed, and the way that she thought about him changed. The next story, which was my favorite, is the namesake of the book. Let me get that page. The Rangers of Merit is also quite good. There's the American Embassy. Oh, I love this story. I can't tell enough about this thing around your neck. So it's actually written, I believe, in second person, where it says like you thought, your uncle, etc. So it really puts you in the perspective of someone who is trying to immigrate to the United States or has done so already. Here it talks about kind of like the ideas that people have prior to coming to the United States, like you've won the American lottery, etc. And then it goes into what people ask for when you leave, that idea of bringing things back, etc., to your family or sending them. Oh, there's the language here, and you'll also notice similar to everything else she does in almost all of her stories, in which she adds words in here. I liked because it was written in second person. There's a ton of questions, which is great because it really puts you into that mind of the character, which I really did enjoy when we were looking at language. But eventually, within the story, she meets a boy after finding out that her uncle, who's not really her uncle, it's just, something culturally said uncle, but they're not blood related, attempts to sexually assault her, and then she leaves and tries to make it on her own. But what was most jarring about this is that she does start falling in love with a Caucasian man who later it talks about like he's very interested in African and Asian culture, is very knowledgeable, but she, with the culture difference, it's very hard for them to get along, and so she gets irritated at him. So that, and then you'll notice that there's still some language that I really enjoyed, just because it's very different in terms of like how, like what we find important in the United States, whereas like someone else may find it differently. And so one of the things that I enjoyed was that you realize that in his life, so the boyfriend's life, he could buy presents that were just presents and nothing else, nothing useful. When he started to buy you shoes and clothes and books, you asked him not to. You didn't want presents, any presents at all. He bought them anyways, and you kept them for your cousins, uncles, and aunts, for when you would one day be able to visit home, even though you did not know how you could afford a ticket and your rent. This particular section is very interesting because it talks about how for her you bought presents that had a use rather than something cute. It talks about like a shiny rock, an expensive scarf from Mexico, where for him a gift is for the enjoyment of the person, whereas like her interpretation of gift is something that you can use, and that's very practical. And then It also talks about the racial aspect where, some people would overly glare at them, other people would be overly nice. So I like this portion because it really, it essentially let you decide as the reader, but puts you into the mind with that second person saying that you're going to do this, of the character herself. And then towards the end of the story, she finds out that her father died, which is very unfortunate. And she gets very upset with how he treated his parents. He had a huge trust fund, all these things, and realizing that they were so different. In the end, she does choose to leave. You don't know. With the last line, then you let go, you, as a reader, you may assume that she might not come back, but it's not sure whether she's letting him go romantically and intellectually, or she's just physically letting him go when she goes back to visit family and just never comes back. And I do like that it's open-ended, and that it's not a very concrete ending, because with matters, one of the heart, and two, kind of navigating the cultural differences. I'm not sure in real life that you would have those clear boundaries. The last story I'm going to talk about is the American Embassy. On the page, you see something very different, or very similar, in that these words are here. The dialogue is pretty even when you're looking at pacing. Similar to her other stories. Most of this is based on, like, if you're looking at the transformational arc, you're looking mostly at the character's internal transformation rather than what's happening. Because within the story of a woman who is at the American Embassy, and she's trying to get an asylum passport or asylum visa. Most of the story happens within a couple hours, in which she's standing in line, talks to a guy behind her, and then ends up walking out of the interview. But most of it is really like her flashing back to things that had happened, and also figuring out like what she wanted her new life to be, whether America for her was the answer, or to stay behind. And so even though this was wonderful, I did enjoy the other one better, the kind of the namesake of the book, which was The Thing Around Your Neck. But I liked the three together because the first one, and this is the author, the first one talked about life in Nigeria, and it gave you a short story. And then the second one, which I talked about, the namesake, really talked about what life in the United States was like for the character, even though it's a different character, different story, but kind of the ideas. And then the last one was really a character, that's gross, who ended up deciding to stay in Nigeria, regardless of, the shining lights and the ideas of coming to America. What I would like to do in terms of my own writing is, one, I love how she integrated that voice. I think that's what I just kept looking at. But I also appreciate how candid she was about situations, and rather than a very condescending or judging way, or even a pitying way. Instead, what she does is just tells some things very clinically as is, unless the reader decide kind of the connotation within the situation. So I enjoyed that. Because even with my own writing or some other writings, as I'm reading about different cultures, sometimes it can be almost like a sad sob story without a stream of hope. Other things that I really enjoyed and hope to use in mine is kind of the brevity of it. I've read her other novels and they are much drawn out, but I love how concise these are with her ideas, and the themes are very similar in terms of where you belong, and also how culture impacts your outlook on life. There are also a lot of themes of forgiveness here. I hope to use this in my own classes that I teach, but I really enjoy this, and I feel like within my own writing I can employ a lot of the things that she did. Her pacing's wonderful. Integration of dialogue. You don't see huge chunks of dialogue anywhere. You really, the most you'll see is a couple lines, but you really see it wonderfully just bled in and blended within the storytelling. So if you guys have any questions, let me know. I was actually, pretty nervous, but I'm glad that I got to do my analysis with this video this time. So see you guys later.